Guys, another Founder Wisdom Pod Sales Edition with Jimmy Comodeca with us. He is co-founder at the SDR newsletter. We're going to talk SDR sales, marketing, but most importantly, newsletter, which is a strong interest of mine nowadays. Jimmy, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about the SDR newsletter?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. So I run the SDR newsletter, which is a weekly email newsletter that goes out to thousands of SDRs. It's entirely focused on tips, tricks, tools, anything to help SDRs be more successful. I have a background. I was an SDR for a while, and then I was an SDR manager. I've also been an AE. But part of the struggle of that I had when I was an SDR was finding actionable content. A lot of it's very theoretical in general. So I started writing about what I was doing and providing very specific tactics. And then it just kind of grew from there. So that's kind of what prompted it. But the main focus is actionable and tactical SDR content.
And why do you think that most content out there wasn't actionable?
I think it's the easy thing to talk about. It's the easy thing to do to talk about like mindset and, work hard, because anybody can make that content like that. It's super easy to do that. And you have to provide specific examples, which can sometimes be, it can open yourself up to a lot of criticism. So I think a lot of people don't want to do that. If you share a specific example, people are going to give feedback on it, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But I think that's why there's so much just fluff content out there, is because people don't want to take the risk. It's the easy thing to do, to just share something like, oh, work harder, make more dials, like that type of stuff. It's not helpful, but it's easy to do. So I think that's why there's so much of it.
Right. Does actionable content rhymes with giving specific advice for specific niches? For example, if it's B2C, B2B, if it's on the phone in their specific case, if it's partnerships, if it's podcast invite as a front funnel. So what does specific advice mean to you?
Well, it's providing examples and understanding that not every example is going to be relevant for everybody, but there's lots of different things that you can take away from it. So if I work in B2B and I see an example from a B2C client, maybe it's not going to be that all that relevant, but I could take pieces of it and use it in my outreach. So, the goal isn't to make it like super like examples that everybody can use, because that's just not realistic. It's not something that's going to be possible. But if I can take a piece from this, a piece from this, a piece from this, suddenly I'm opening myself up to, a number of different ways to do things. And oftentimes you can find things that work. So that's why I'm okay with providing a lot of examples, but understanding that, not everybody's going to be able to take away something from everything, but you can take a lot away from it. It's the bigger picture things that matter more. And that's what I'm more concerned about.
Right. Would you qualify yourself as a successful SDR back then?
I think I started off and I was terrible. I think I was really bad. And then I got better. And I think that's, I've seen a little bit of both perspectives now. I'm like, okay, what was I doing when I can look back now and say like, okay, what was I doing back then that made me so bad? And I can answer those questions now, because I drastically changed a lot of what I do. But it was a mixed bag. I was really bad at first. I got a lot better once I started talking with more people, asking for help and getting involved in some more things, whether that be on LinkedIn or communities. But I've come a long way, I'd say, especially now that I do it for myself.
Looking at your website, and yeah, really love the high first name cup. I'll definitely order one when I'll be back in Canada. Love it. Take me off your list is quite hilarious as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with the shift there from SDR to starting your own company. That's the first shift I want to talk about. Why did you decided to make that bold move?
Well, ultimately at some point in time, I realized I'd want to work for myself. Like, I think I'd be much more motivated to cold call for myself. Like, if I'm the one that gets to keep everything, like that's a lot more motivating to me. So I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So I just started writing and collecting email addresses. I read a long time ago that like a good tactic is, if you're not sure what you want to do, is pick some topic and just collect email addresses because you can figure it out later. And that's kind of what I did is, so I just started writing and trying to collect as many email addresses as I could with the intent that, you know, down the road, maybe I want to do something else. And that's kind of just how that started. But then once I started writing and making things happening, all these new opportunities that I didn't expect started arising. So it was sort of an accidental, but somewhat intentional path. So
Right.
yeah.
You started that 2 years ago. So during the pandemic, did that coincide with like giving you a little kick in the butt to get started?
Yeah, it totally did. I mean, well, it was that weird time where like, no, everybody's like, okay, how do we do outbound right now? Like nobody wants to buy anything. Nobody knows what's happening. It's a giant mystery. And I'm like, okay, like I'll just share what I'm doing. Like whether it's right or wrong, I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing. And that's what I did. And then people started sharing that because it was like, okay, at least we know what other people are doing. And then, you know, that was part of it. And then part of it too is like, okay, we had nothing to do. I was in New York. I was in Brooklyn during COVID. Everything was shut down. Couldn't go anywhere. I had to do something. And I thought, you know, okay, this is something to keep me busy. And it aligned with what I was talking about earlier, where like, you don't know what to do, collect email addresses. It's something to work towards. It's like a little game. You get more and more, you watch the number go up and get higher and higher.
Right. And you live in one of the most expensive places in the world. How did you survive slash get quick ROI slash monetize that ASAP to survive?
Yeah, well, so it's kind of the thing is I actually didn't monetize it right away. I had a lot of people coming to me like, hey, like I've got this tool, I want to advertise in it. And I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm at the point where it's even going to make sense. Because I just didn't know. Like, it's hard to like price it at the beginning. I'm like, I don't even know how much does this even cost when I've got, you know, not that many subscribers. So, you know, living in one of the most expensive places, I wasn't counting on this at first for my income. This was just an added bonus. Because I kept my job. And then once I started to figure out the monetization aspect of the newsletter. That's when I sort of shifted and was like, okay, maybe I could do something more with this.
Right. And you
So,
talk about opportunities arising. What kind of opportunities arose there?
yeah. So early on, I had the opportunity to partner with a community, an SDR community. So I was writing content for them. And that's just because they saw the SDR newsletter and they're like, hey, this is cool. You know, we've got another sort of thing that we're doing in the SDR world. Can you help us write some content? Can we sponsor the newsletter? And I was like, great. Yeah. Like, didn't think about doing that, but like, let's do it. So then I started writing more blog posts for this other company. And then I started, you know, networking with the people within that community and seeing what they were doing. So that was just one of the starting points. But then from there, like I've also had, this is kind of how I got into recruiting. Like I work in SDR recruitment right now. And a big part of it is from the newsletter. My first ever client that I got from recruiting came from the newsletter. Somebody responded back to the newsletter and was like, hey, you know, we need help finding an SDR. Can you help us? And then I just took, you know, of course I was like, yes, of course I can help you. And took it from there.
So what's the model when it comes to recruitment? Is it the classic take 25% of their salary first year? Like, why would they go with you?
Yeah, well, it's a couple different things. So yeah, I mean, we have a varying percentage of what we do. We negotiate it based off of the particular role and, you know, what that specific search is going to look like. But why people go with us is, first off, we have a giant reach. That's just the reality is we can access a lot of SDRs that other people can't. So that's just one of the selling points right off the bat. It's just the reach. But I've also been an SDR manager myself. And oftentimes what happens is you have recruitment companies who have these young recruiters who are just getting anybody and everybody through that, you know, just so they can hope that they can get the job. I'm not going to send over bad people. Like I've been an SDR manager. I know how frustrating that is when you get this like influx of just bad candidates. So, you know, I take a lot of what I learned when I was an SDR manager and I put that into recruitment. So I send over the best of the best. And, you know, especially when it comes to harder to hire roles, like on-site roles, you know, nowadays with remote work and things like that, they're just harder to find people for. So I do prospecting myself. Like I take the skills I learned as an SDR and I'm using that to find candidates. So, what better person to find an SDR than an SDR? And, I have no shame in that. Like, I'll put in the work for it. And so that's kind of what makes us different. We got the reach, we've got the experience on both the management level and the SDR level. So, we've seen a lot of success, and we're looking to keep that going.
You actually call the candidates that you have in mind? Do you have them in multi-touch sequences or?
Yeah. Yeah. So I put them into sequences. I cold call them. Like, I never had a recruiter cold call me when I was an SDR. Maybe they do that, but maybe they just didn't call me. But I'll call candidates out of the blue, no problem. Like, that's the best way to get in touch with them.
I
So
agree.
I'll do it. I'm shameless.
Yes, and that's good. That's perfect. I'm actually thinking of doing it for the podcasts, to get
Yeah.
podcast guests. So it's gonna be more than thoughts. I'm literally gonna put like the top people I want on my podcast, and I'm gonna cold call these famous folks and see if they answer their phone. That'd be funny.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
you have quite the expertise when it comes to recruiting great candidates. I want to restart my calling SDRs program because I've been quite a lot about cold email and LinkedIn outreach. And is it like me resting on my laurels because I have so many meetings? Kind of.
Yeah.
I don't need to do calls nowadays, although I am going to restart them. What do you look for into an SDR that could work at my team and execute on these calls in those multi-touch sequence? I'd set them up on Apollo, straight up, and they would
Yeah.
need to do the calls on this day. What should I look for? Is it like a junior candidate that is motivated, ambitious, straight out of college? Or is it more this experienced guy from Serbia that worked at various SaaS and has perfect English? What should I look for?
I always talk about how it depends where you are as a company as to who you want to hire. If, like, smaller companies should never be hiring the people out of college without experience. There's too many things that can go wrong. There's so many things on the technical side that have to be handled that they're just not going to know about. It's one of those things where they don't know what they don't know. And there's nothing, you can't fault them for that. It's just the reality. So I always say hire experienced people, because there's something to be said for, having gone through that initial process of learning what the SDR role is. So having them, hit the phones and fail fast and owning that failure is so important. So I would love to see, the best candidates I talk to are people who have done the role, and they are shameless with how often they fail. Like, they'll share their stories of when they got hung up on, no problem. They're like, yeah, okay, anyway, this person hung up on me, cussed me out, and then I called somebody else and booked a meeting the next call. Like, I love people who aren't afraid to fail. They'll fail publicly, and they'll fail in front of everybody. That is the most successful candidate. And, you can teach all the technical side of things, but there's something really, really valuable about that.
Kind of a dichotomy here. It's kind of big ego, but no ego. It's kind of,
Yeah.
I don't care that he hung up on me, but I'm competitive. I want to reach my number.
Yeah.
When I started in sales, yeah, I guess, well, I always had a healthy ego, to say it that way. I got hung up upon like 200 times a day
Yeah.
when I started in sales. It did somewhat hurt me, but it did create like that shield quite quickly. So I guess you're seeking for people that have some experience facing rejection, either door
Yeah.
to door or straight up, like having done a bunch of calls.
Right. Exactly. And, there's no better way to get better at cold calling than cold calling. So the people who've done it, the people who understand that, it's a grind. You'll get hung up on. Nothing you can do about that. You can only control the things you can control. So I like the people that fail publicly and the people that fail loud, because typically those are the people that bounce back.
You feel we can still go 100% commission in 2023 and get like a superstar?
No, the short answer is no. I don't think so. And I think any quality salesperson isn't going to take a commission only role, because the company has to have some skin in the game as well. Like, they have to be able to enable you with the tools to be successful. And oftentimes, if they're commission only, there's no incentive for them to do that. They have no skin in the game, and you're probably not going to find a quality salesperson if you're commission only. that's just where we're at in 2023. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are going to disagree with me, but based off the people I talk to SDRs every day. The best ones are not going to take a role like that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What payment structure would you suggest? If you can have like precise numbers, it really help.
Yeah. So right now, I think to be competitive in the SDR hiring market, you have to have like 55K base, around 80 to 85 OTE at the minimum. Like that's going to be a competitive fairly average salary. But if you're looking for the best of the best, you want to hire somebody with experience. I've seen 65K, 70K base, and then OTE all the way 90 to 100. But obviously those are going to be more experienced people. You want it's not going to be somebody right out of college, but that's kind of the range I'm seeing right now. But anything below that is fine. Like if you do 50K base, 80 OTE, like that's okay, but you better have proof that people are actually hitting their targets. Because the biggest problem we had in 2021 was all this VC money came in and everybody's like, hire as much as you can. And they started offering like these super high salaries, but they didn't have any proof that anybody was hitting their goals. So they overhired, people couldn't hit their goals. And then these OTEs didn't make any sense anymore. And then all these candidates got burned. So people are a lot more skeptical now of OTE. So if you're going to have a lower base and a higher OTE, you better have some type of proof that people can actually hit those goals.
Where should I look for? So let's say that I build a campaign on Apollo to get these folks in. Let's say that the salary is right. Let's say that I have an ROI on my side. Even in the short term, even the first month, I would aim for some kind of ROI, which is tricky. My sales cycle is somewhat short, so I think that could be done. And it's high ticket enough to cover their salary. Where should I look for these folks? Because I tend to look in markets that are underexploited, for example, Serbia, or for example, North Africa, places where other companies won't look at. Where should I look for these folks?
Well, in full transparency, I don't have a lot of experience hiring outside the US. Most of the roles I work on are either hybrid roles, on-site roles, remote roles, all within the US. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what markets are underrepresented, and I'm sure there's plenty out there though.
Let's go with my second question then, which is almost related to that one. Like, how can I convince them to come work for me other than the salary, right? That's easy. Like, but how can I convince them? Obviously the job post is looking good, but what kind of, how should I interview them? So to make sure that I have a top pick on my side, and also that this guy can possibly have a quick ROI for my company, or this gal.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of mock interviews, like mock cold calls, things like that, just to get an idea of like how they sound on the phone. But then if you want to get them excited as well, obviously you have to bring something to the table as well. And that's why I always tell people is show the numbers, show the metrics. If you're truly proud of what you guys are doing at your company, show the dashboard in Salesforce, show the dashboard in HubSpot, show them the numbers. Because, it's one thing for you to just tell me that like, okay, we hit 200% of our goal. It's another thing to show me that, because, any hiring manager can come up here and say whatever they want, but, it's a different story if you have the numbers to prove it. And that's going to be a much more compelling case for a candidate. But in terms of like, if you want to make sure that candidate's right, it's always about the examples. It's always about the cold call, how they sound on the phone, how they interact in the interview. It's things like that. And, there's nothing better than a cold call. And even better on the candidate side, what I always tell people is if you have it, bring recordings, bring examples of emails, bring examples of everything you have, and build like a brag book. I wrote an article about that essentially because we had a candidate do this, and it was like the best experience for both sides, because the hiring manager knew exactly what they were going to get. They have examples, recordings, all that fun stuff. And and then the candidate knew exactly what they wanted. So it was a win-win.
How are the best salespeople using AI? Because nowadays when I recruit also new people in sales and SDRs, I want to make sure that they're not only tech friendly, but that they use ChatGPT, for example, and that it's second nature for them. So how can I make well, the first question is like
Yeah.
somewhat easy, like if they use ChatGPT or not, and what are the use cases that SDR are using AI to double, triple, 10x their productivity nowadays?
Yeah, I always say use ChatGPT for the tasks. So whether that be list building, list enhancement, things like that. I don't recommend it using for actual sales messaging because it's very average when it comes to that. So I say use it for the task. Don't use it for the actual outreach itself. But if you create super targeted lists using ChatGPT, it's going to make the outreach process 1,000 times easier, because all you have to do is bucket them into extremely targeted sequences. And then that once you go to do that outreach process, you can craft a message that's pretty relevant for all of them. And it's not going to take you all that long. But ChatGPT is super useful. There's a number of tools coming up in the market. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Reggie AI. It's a pretty cool tool. But there's a number of AI-based tools that are out there. So I always, ask candidates how they use it now, because even outside of sales, if they're using ChatGPT on their own personal stuff, once they figure out how to do something useful, that's going to blend into their professional life as well. So the people that are using it on their own are definitely people I would want to talk to. So it doesn't have to just be sales related, because there's always going to be a blend between the two.
Nice. I want to come back to the newsletter for the last
Yeah.
couple minutes we have here. How many subscribers do you have, and when did you actually start to monetize if it wasn't the first couple months?
Yeah, so we keep a very clean list. So we're constantly deleting people off the list, actually. So we've got about 10,000 subscribers that are very engaged, and we constantly delete people who haven't opened in a while, or for whatever other criteria that we have, which we've got a couple different things, but we didn't monetize it until we got to maybe a couple thousand. We had plenty of like people asking to include things in it, and for a while there I did it just for free or for like a very low price. And I've gone back and forth on like how I charge, like flat fee or like some type of referral link. But it really is dependent on the actual offering itself of how I want to do that. So I don't know. So it's, again, tough to say, because for such a long time, the SDR newsletter was a side project. Like, it wasn't a priority of mine. It was just something I was doing on the side while I was working my 9-to-5 job. But once we started figuring out that we could do a little bit more with it, it started to become a little bit more of a priority.
And can you disclose the brackets of revenue a newsletter like this one can make? Is it 10K a month? Is it 20K a month? Is it like a full self-sustaining business at this point? Is it enough money, enough traction for you to start hiring and investing more in it?
I could. The issue is I'm not sure I want to hire more. And the way that we quantify it is tough, because our recruiting business plays a major role in this. So, we could make one hire and make, $12,000, $13,000. Does that technically count as revenue from the newsletter? I don't know, kind of. But we make recurring revenue in, it could be a couple $1,000s in recurring revenue just from the advertisement alone. But the real money comes from, right now at least, comes from the recruitment side of the business. Because we've got access to all these SDRs, companies want them. And if we can make that placement, when we make that placement, we get a decent payday there. So quantifying exactly how much revenue the newsletter brings in is tough, because it's sort of related to the recruitment business, somewhat not. So yeah, but I mean, in general, it's a couple $1,000s a month. Like, we could hire people to scale out the recruitment business. But at the moment, I really want to keep it like a lean business.
Right. Do you recommend I get in the recruitment business? Is it like complicated to find someone a job? How long does it take for them to sign the contract? How long does it take for them to find a job? And then if it's like 25% of their 100K salary-ish, well,
Mhm.
that's 25K in your pockets after, let's say, 120 days. Is that the type of business it is?
Yeah, yeah, similar to that. It's gonna, again, these contracts depend on so many different things. So whether that be an on-site, hybrid, remote role, the timelines are going to be different on that. Like, because finding somebody for an on-site role is just going to take longer. That's just the reality. Um, but whether I'd recommend getting into it, I recommend people who have a very specific niche do it. And if they already have the interest, the connections to do it, starting from scratch is going to be tough, obviously. But anything's possible. So I wouldn't ever discourage anybody from doing it. But um, it's kind of a mystery as to where the economy goes in the near future. So, talent acquisition is also one of the things that's often affected when, we face an economic downturn. So, we have to keep those things in mind as we go forward. But yeah, so it just depends on so many different things. So like timelines could be month to several months to get paid. So it just depends.
Patience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the newsletter's quicker cash flow. So it's a nice little hybrid right there.
Yeah.
Nice talking today, Jimmy. Where
Yeah.
can people find out more about you and the SDR newsletter?
Yeah, so add me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. Always happy to chat. And then if you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can go to the SDRnewsletter.com. No spaces, no hyphens, no nothing. We've got a lot of content on there in terms of blog posts, things like that. So, but yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you so much.